Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, a podcast with me, your host, Mark DeCano. It's a truth universally acknowledged that the man in possession of a podcast shall be in want of a guest. And so it is with me, a comedy fan with a lifetime of appreciating live comedy, who each episode talks to someone in the world of comedy to find out if it means the same to them as it does to me. You can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you'd like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a stand-up comedian with a natural, easygoing demeanour and a ready wit. At the 2023 British Comedian of the Year finals, Chorlton described his act as whimsical Irish storytelling with subtlety and grace. It's stand-up comedian Jack Hester. Was comedy and laughter, was it a big thing in the household or in school, in the playground, that sort of thing?
Yeah, massive. Because I'm from a small country town, and my family owned a pub, so I hung around the pub a lot when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And like a small country town pub in Ireland is just all banter. It's just all crack jokes. Mm. My dad was very funny, and my granddad was a very funny man as too. Like he had a reputation for being very funny. And then we used to watch and listen to a lot of stand-up. Like I remember I remember watching Billy Connolly very young. Mm-hmm. Like and one of the reasons I remember it is I remember the cursing. Like yeah. And I remember I was young at an age where you weren't allowed to curse. No one was supposed to curse in front of you. You weren't allowed to watch anything that cursed. Yeah. But Billy Connolly had a complete. He was allowed. Do you know what I mean? And it was very unusual. I still remember it, like when Billy Connolly would curse and the adults in the room would laugh. Yeah. Like it was very unusual to hear a curse and the adults not be, not criticize the curse. Like I'd never experienced that. So it was a neighbour of ours. I watched Billy Connolly in a neighbour's house. So I remember Billy Connolly. And my dad had a tape cassette of a guy called Brendan Grace, mm-hmm. who was an Irish comedian. And he when we go on journeys, he used to play it in the car. Like we listened to that tape loads, and it's same jokes, but we used to listen to it a lot. Yeah. And my dad would always tell jokes. Like my dad would tell bad jokes, like, but he had a stockpile of jokes he was always telling. Yeah. But I think, and then in school, like in both primary school and secondary school, I think more so secondary school as teenagers, like everybody was funny. Like where I went to school, everybody was funny. Yeah.
Well, what about comedy as a career? When did that begin?
Well, it never really. I would say when I was younger, it never would have dawned on me that it was in any way achievable or possible until I would say, I remember when Tommy Tiernan first came out, and Tommy Tiernan seemed very different because Tommy Tiernan wasn't from a city. He was from a small town. Yeah. And you could tell he was from a small town because of his accent. And also he spoke about small town things. And, I would have had a kind of small town mentality where I would have thought you can only do things like comedy if you're from Dublin, if you're from the city, or, right. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have thought people from, I would have had a bit of a small town inferiority complex. But then Tommy Tiernan came along and he was a superstar. And then you're like, well, so that would have been the first time where you're kind of thinking it's possible. But it wouldn't have been on my radar at all. Like my parents would have been very the only thing my parents were strict about was education. Like there was no way they were going to let any of us grow up without going to university and getting a profession. And I don't even think they would have been supportive of a degree, even like something like history or philosophy, even something that was intellectual but didn't have a guaranteed job at the end of it. I don't think they would have been on board with that at all. Like there would have been very much, I would have had you kind of see it as an immigrant mentality. I certainly would have seen it when I went to like places like the Jewish Museum in Berlin, like that would where Jewish people would have had a mentality that they always had to do something professional that was essential because no one was going to help them. Yeah. And I would have had that kind of Irish upbringing. Like you have to do a professional job that is needed, because no one's going to give you a nice job. No one's going to help you.
Yeah.
Like we don't rule the world. Like we're servants in the world, sort of thing. That so if you want a livelihood or you want a comfortable life, you're going to have to do something that no one. You're going to have to do jobs people don't want to do.
Yeah.
There would have been no, like, if you had said, "Oh, I'm going to go work in television or film," they'd be like, "No one's going to give you, no one's going to help you." Those kind of avenues are not for you. Like that would have been, I would have believed that. Like that would have been, and everybody would have been telling you that. Like not telling you directly, but like the whole school, the whole community, your family, like that.
Yeah.
That would have been very much the ethos, and other kids would have been indoctrinated with that too. Like that would have been, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's an element of truth to that, and there would have been an attitude that once you got your degree or your profession, or once you had your job, then you can go off and try do something.
Yeah.
Then you can have. So that would have been. I don't have any issue with that. So it wouldn't have been on my radar at all. I always had a vague notion that I would do. I did pharmacy, so I also had a vague notion that I'd do pharmacy. I get my profession, get like that's your kind of safety net degree. But I always had a vague notion that I would then try to do something else afterwards.
Right.
But I wasn't sure what. And after I qualified, I did a business degree. I was still kind of wondering what to do. I toyed with the idea of trying to set up different businesses. My dad was a politician, so I kind of looked at politics a little bit, but I was trying to look to do something that would be a little bit more exciting. But comedy had really not come on the radar at all. And then I got a vague notion of I'd like to try and get into radio.
Right.
I don't know why. I thought it looked like a very easy job. I looked at radio, but I thought they had the easiest job in the world. I was looking at it going, they're getting paid for working a couple of hours a day, like, and I thought that'd be great. You'd have time to go to the gym. You'd be able to, you'd have a nice life. And then I moved to London, kind of vaguely with the impression that I was going to try to get into radio, and I got on hospital radio and pirate radio, and I did a bit of research, and I met more people involved in the industry, and they were all just like, yeah, it's not, the probability is against you. Like there's not much realism in this.
Right.
You don't have a journalistic degree. But then they did sort of say that if you become famous, like if you're on a reality TV show, then you can become a radio presenter. Do you know what I mean? Do you know, like they then sort of, they kind of shut you all down, and then they're like, well, actually there is other,
Yeah.
And then I ended up doing acting classes for a year. And I didn't intend to. We were given, I met a guy, and myself and him were going to schools giving speech talks about healthy living to teenagers.
Right.
And they went well, but I thought we were shite. Right? I thought because we weren't good public speakers. We were very, we were like amateur public speakers. We were very nervous, very monotoned. We weren't relaxed. It was very tense. And then I went to a friend's wedding, and he gave an amazing speech at his wedding, and I couldn't believe how good his speech was. And he told me he had done 2 years of acting classes.
Right.
He had trained as an actor.
Yeah. And
so then I thought I was going to do he said, you should do course in London. There's loads. So I did like after every Tuesday, 7 to 9 or something. I did an acting course. And I got really into it, really liked it. And I ended up doing 12 months of courses. And the best one I did was I did a 10-week course every Saturday in RADA.
Okay.
Which was a new thing. RADA didn't normally do kind of little courses like that. They only do the big kind of degree. But it was the teachers that do the big degree, and they told me that I could have been. They told me if they got me at a young age, they reckon they would have been able to train me to be a stage actor.
Right.
They thought I had a good voice, good energy.
Yeah.
They thought I had all the kind of raw materials to be a good stage actor. And it was weird because I kind of always felt that was something I would have liked to have done, but I never would have. it wouldn't have seemed conceivable to me.
Right.
So I never would have been able to admit when I was a teenager that I'd like to pursue it. It wouldn't have seemed. I think people would have thought I was odd or something. I don't know. Anyway, it wouldn't have. But then that and they were telling me then to go. What you should do next is this, and what you should do next, and it's the courses quickly get very expensive.
Sure. Yeah.
And then it's very time consuming. You have to learn off the lines, and it's very time consuming. Like it was, even that year I did it. I to pay for it, I quit drinking, and I basically went to work and did acting classes. I didn't socialize. I didn't do anything else for that year. And that wasn't, for me, that wasn't sustainable. And then I was kind of looking for another thing to do that was kind of in line with radio, in line with acting, something that I thought would be, because when I did radio too, like for a few years I did radio and it was really enjoyable. And I kept feeling like I was getting better and better. But I think in all of these things, I then got to a point where I didn't feel like I was getting any better. Like the learning curve completely plateaued. So that's when I started looking for something else to do.
Right.
And then when the acting I was looking for something else that would feel like I was learning again.
Yeah.
And then I started comedy, and I didn't really. I think I was still kind of looking for a way into the acting, but once I started it, very quickly I realized, no, this suits me better than anything else. You don't have to learn off lines. You don't have to work with anybody, so you don't have to arrange your schedule with anyone.
Yeah.
It's far easier to pursue from a time and resource perspective than acting. Far easier. And I wasn't good at the start, but I remember thinking at the start that I'll be able to learn how to do this. I'll figure this out.
Yeah.
And it's weird because everything I thought about it, and this was the same with acting, every preconception I had about what it was about before I did it was wrong. Like I was acting massively because I didn't realize there was so much technique to acting, like the Meisner game, and I got really into buying books and studying the technique of acting, and just all the kind of theory, like I have a science degree, so I love theory and stuff like that. So I didn't think there'd be so much theory in acting. I just thought it was kind of, I don't know, you just do it. Like I didn't realize there was so much kind of philosophy and theory and almost, I suppose, a bit of science to it too. So that got really into, and then comedy. I think comedy is very scientific. And then I think one of the things I was always looking for, and I think I found it with comedy, is I think I was always looking for something where it can never end.
Right.
So with radio, like even with being a pharmacist, the first few years being a pharmacist was very, very exciting. And you feel like you're learning lots and lots. But then over the years, it then becomes the learning curve plateaus.
Right.
You're only learning a little bit.
Yeah.
And radio was very like that. The learning curve plateaus. But I think with comedy, and I think music could be like that. I think you can always be learning. Because I think there's no limit to what you can do.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit like, it is like an art form in that there are no permanent parameters. So like, I know a lot of people didn't like Nanette when it came out, that the comedy special where she,
right,
it starts off very funny and it finishes very funny, but in the middle it gets quite sad.
Yeah.
And it gets quite somber. But even though I probably wasn't the target demographic for that, I love that because that kind of confirmed to me what I had already felt a bit about comedy, that actually you can really do anything with it. So I don't think you'll ever get bored. If the learning plateaus, change your style, change your approach.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think you can go forever. So I just feel it's something that will keep me occupied for a long time. Whereas, and that was definitely something I was looking for, because I think if I don't feel like I'm learning, or I don't feel like I'm doing something that's stimulating, I think I would get bored, and I think I'd just end up drinking or something,
It's interesting. This you talk about obviously this thirst for learning and constant learning,
Constant
driving
learning, yeah.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also you talked about when it all began about, everything being strict and the idea of doing comedy or anything like that was out of bounds essentially. So do you have like a rebellious side as well as a sort of self-improvement
Oh,
side?
maybe, yeah, I'd say, yeah, probably do. Like, I think everybody in Ireland is so rebellious that we don't see it as rebellious. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's only when you go around the world and you travel that you realize that most people don't have an issue with rules or obeying rules, but like where I grew up, everybody has, and obviously there's like real historic reasons for that. Like,
Sure.
people felt the rules were unfair. So it's,
Yeah.
so I think all Irish people are quite, and the most famous Irish people are rebels. Like the most revered people that the country's ever produced are rebels. Like where I'm from, the most famous person where I'm from is a guy, Sean McKeown, who was a rebel, IRA rebel. Like he's the, the football pitch is named after him. He's one of the most famous people there. So.
Well, what about the specific avenue from acting to comedy? What was your first experience of doing your own comedy live?
So the first gig I did was in a pub in Bethnal Green, and it was a tiny little room, and there was only about 10 or 12 people there, and I realized afterwards that they were basically comedians. Like it wasn't. I think there might have been 2 or 3 real audience members.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think now. Darren Walsh was running the gig because he lived beside the pub.
Yeah.
And Ali Woods was on the lineup, and Andre the Fetus, I think, was on the lineup as well. Yeah. But I definitely remember meeting Ali the first time I did a gig, and it was to about 10 people, and I think I did 5 minutes. And I think I made them laugh. I think I remember noting down that I made them laugh 3 times. And I remember thinking that was really good. I now know that that's not very good. But at the time, I thought that was very good. And bizarrely enough, one of the jokes I did on the very first gig, I still use now sometimes. It still works. Like it's a joke that has got millions of views online. So that was a joke that it wasn't one that I had planned to do. But I remember whatever I had written out that I thought was going to take 5 minutes only took 3 minutes because I didn't realize that when they're not laughing, you speed up to distract. That was my big thing when I started. To distract people from the silence, I just spoke faster.
Right.
So I had 2 minutes left and I had ran out of material. So I told a story that is pretty true. Like I didn't really change much of it to make it work for comedy. I changed a little bit, but I basically told a story of something I saw once, and it worked. And it's weird. That one joke kind of carried me for a long time. I think it could have been. It probably was 6 months before I had another joke that worked. Yeah. So that one carried me for ages. And then so I did 3 gigs, 3 weeks in a row to 10 people in a pub, and then I did King Gong.
Right. Yeah.
Gig number 4 was King Gong, 400 people, and I didn't land the joke, but I lasted 2 minutes. I talked fast and distracted them, and then I didn't know anything about comedy. Like I didn't at that stage when I had done the King Gong, which was my 4th gig. I didn't know about Edinburgh. I didn't really know about anything else. But now I knew that if you win King Gong, you get a gig in the Comedy Store. So that became my whole goal. That was it. I had one goal. I was like, and I knew you can only do it every 6 months. So I was like, well, I'm going to come back in 6 months and I'm going to work and I'm going to try to get better at this. And I didn't write it down or anything. I didn't formalize it, but I had a vague notion. I started reading a lot of books about comedy, and I had a vague notion that learning comedy was like doing a university degree.
Right.
And the kind of the sort of benchmarks I got was it takes 10 years to master and find your voice. So I was always like, okay, 10 years to master, find your voice, right? But I decided it would take 4 years. You know, my pharmacy degree was 4 years, so I thought it'd take me 4 years to win King Gong. That was my goal. I'm going to win King Gong in 4 years.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, I came second and got my spot in the Comedy Store.
Nice.
So that felt, you know, that I was over the moon with that. But that was all I did was for years. I would just, then I found the 12th gig I ever did was the Blackout in Up the Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I did the Blackout, the first time I did it, I actually last 5 minutes, which is astonishing. The next 3 times I didn't. But the first time I did it, I last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I remember I asked, Gelly was there and Johnny Cochran, and I asked them, could I do it every week?
Mm-hmm.
And they said no. But they said, you can do it every 2 months. But they said, if I lived nearby, they said, if you show up on the day and we have a dropout, we'll put you on. So in theory, you could do it every week.
Yeah.
But I didn't live nearby. But what I realized after a while was they always had dropouts for the Blackout.
Mm.
And they send around an email at about 10 or 11 o'clock on a Thursday going, we got a few spaces. And you can do them as many as you want. Mm. So I then did a thing where I used to keep my Thursdays free so that I could do the Blackout. And I did the Blackout. I reckon I have the record for it. I did the Blackout 30 times.
Wow.
I did it 30 times. I got gonged off 5 times, and I won it 5 times, and I beat it 25 times. Wow. So I reckon I have the Blackout record. And then I basically did open mic to practice for the Blackout. And then if it worked at the Blackout, I kept it for King Gong. Yeah. And that was it. That was my strategy.
Yeah.
And that's all I did for years. And even after I won King Gong, I kept doing that. Because then I thought, well, now I need 5 minutes. So I needed 5 minutes to win King Gong, but now I need 20 minutes to perform in the Comedy Store. That's the next goal. And I thought if I had 20 minutes, that if you picked any 5 of it, it could win the Gong Show. Yeah. Then that would be a good 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So that was basically, so I'm 6 years in now, and that I'd say until about maybe in the last year or two, like that's no longer the focus, but that was the focus because I feel now I have that 20.
Yeah.
And now I'm probably thinking a little bit more about an hour show. And I do think an hour show, at one time I thought you could do like, you know, if you just had 3 20s, if you had 3 club 20s, that'd be a good hour show. But now I'm not as convinced of that. I think in an hour show now, I think you have to have some world view in there. Whereas I think in a 20-minute set, you don't. A 20-minute set, you just need big jokes. But for now, I'm not really. I just want to keep getting better and better at the 20 minutes. Like I'm not. Yeah. I'll do the odd preview here and there, but I'm not going to Edinburgh, and I'm not really thinking or focusing towards an hour show. I just want to keep recycling my 20. So I just want to keep bringing in new material and just keep making the 20 better and better and better and better. Yeah. And I really think that how I perform a 20 can improve. I think I can make it much better.
Okay.
And I don't. There's some acts, but I don't think a lot of acts look to how to make the performance better. I think a lot of acts look to make the writing better, but not the performance better. And like I'd love to be able to do, I suppose, different kind of tricks. Like again, now Tommy Tiernan be my favorite. Like, but Tommy has such a range of performative styles. Like, you know, he'll whisper a joke, then shout a joke, then he uses cadence. Then he does one where he kind of uses his body a lot. James Acaster be another one. You know, there's so many type of styles. Like they're mixing so much stuff in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm thinking now. Like, you know, how can you make the 20 minutes? You know, how can you play? You know, in 20 minutes, it'd be great to tell like 10 different styles of jokes. Like, you know, like music. Like,
yeah.
You know, you have your rock song, you have your ballad, but like it's. You know, have I a joke that I can have whisper? Can I have one that's a bit longer, a couple of short ones? You know, mixing the styles. That's sort of what I'm thinking now.
Yeah.
But I have found when I started thinking less about writing hour shows and just focusing on the 20 minutes, the amount of material I have has increased. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think I'm writing more material because I think when I was trying to think of hour shows, I was overcomplicating things, and I was always trying to think of longer bits rather than when you're focusing on 20 minutes. You're always adding shorter bits,
Yeah.
but then the shorter bits all add together to create a longer bit.
I was going to say, did you feel like you were more trying to fill the time than
you're trying to fill the time?
Yes.
Yeah. So the time is becoming a guide, and it's not a good guide. I don't think it's a good guide because you shouldn't be, like. Then you're then essentially, you know, if you look at it from a production point of view, your focus is quantity and not quality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas if you focus on the quality, you'll make up the quantity. So I think it's better to just focus on, and I still think there's no rush. Even when I started, I thought people rushed to Edinburgh very quickly, and I can understand why they do, because like the industry definitely picks early favourites and elevates them. You know, like it does pick winners, and there is a bit of a lottery to it. But I suppose if you've got the, what do they call it, the static mindset and the growth mindset, like when I started, I didn't think, oh, I'm a very funny character, I'm a very funny person. I thought this is a craft that I can really learn how to do, like. Yeah. And so I never thought I was very funny at the start, but I think I can get very good at it. Yeah. If that makes sense. So I still think I'm better off working. Like, I still feel like there's no need to sell the product yet, because I'm still in product development stage.
You talk a lot about like learning and improvement and development, and but also in terms of doing these competitions, is there a competitiveness to it as well? Is that you want to not only to do well, but to do the best? Oh yeah. Well,
every gig I do, I want to perform my best. Every gig I do, like it's not in the competitions, but I felt, and I still feel, but certainly at the start, I feel like the pressure of the competitions is good. Like, you know, so now I love the gong shows. Like, I love the whole format of the gong shows. Like, I love everything about them. I love the mob mentality. Like, I like watching gong shows as well. Like, you know, I don't like just like being in them. I like watching them. And, you know, I have been booed off after one joke, and I thought it was fucking hilarious. Like, I love everything about it. I love the cruelty of it. I love everything about it. But it's also, the gong shows are very democratic, you know? I think there's a real honesty to them. There's a kind of a purity to them, and I just like them. And the competitions as well. The competitions I never enjoyed as much, because they tend to be, certainly the earlier rounds tend to be smaller audience. It's a lot quieter. Like, I do like the wildness of the gong shows, and I like the big audience. But I still thought they were always good doing. Like, I do think it's always good to practice performing under pressure, because like if the end goal, like my end goal, I'd love to be able to perform in theatres, solo shows in theatres, and like that'll be pressure. Do you know what I mean? Like, so you know, you want to learn how to perform under pressure, and bizarrely enough, I ended up reading, when I started, a lot of books about sports psychology. And I found them very helpful for comedy. And there's a great book called The Pressure Principle, which he was the guy who worked with the England rugby team. And his big kind of, I suppose, sports innovation was he made training as much like a match as possible. So he said that, you know, you should be always practicing for what you're hoping to do, like. And the big events you're going to be under pressure. So you should be practicing under pressure. And the competitions, you know, a lot of the time you do a heat of a competition and it's in a room with 30 people. Now, the night before you can do a room with 30 people at a bringer gig. Right. But there's pressure to this one. So that makes it infinitely, you know, more beneficial to you from a learning point of view, like, than the other one. Like, how do you perform under pressure? Because if you're a great performer but you crumble under pressure, well, you're not going to go anywhere. Yeah. You know.
what about the style of comedy you do? Because you're very much a storyteller, but there's a lot of audience engagement. Is that the manner that you always expected to do when you entered into comedy, when you started, or was that just natural?
Yeah, I think that came. Yeah, it's interesting because I get described I get described as a storyteller, and I think the jokes originally come from storytelling. But most comedians would see me as a joke teller because it's set up and punched, like it's. So I think my style is usually how I start is at an open mic level. I tell a story, and then I try to construct the story into a joke. So I think my typical bit would be a minute joke that started off as a 3-minute story that got condensed into a joke. And I think, to be honest, I think the style I have is very much what I thought it would be. The only thing I kind of hope would happen is I hope that the style will stay the same, the rhythm and the cadence and how I deliver punchlines and all that. But I'd like to think that the topics will become more kind of more interesting.
Right.
I'd like to think as I get better that I'll keep the same style, but the topics will become more interesting. Because I do think that when you become very good at comedy, you can then talk about anything and make it funny. And I think that's where I'd like to go to. I'd like to be able to talk about anything and make it funny. Whereas now I find something that is funny, and then I form it into a style that suits me. But I'm hoping that eventually I'll be able to keep the style and change the substance, put whatever I want into it.
Yeah.
And my favorite comedian would be early Chris Rock, like that, walking across the stage, the preacher. I think there's something very funny about the preacher style of comedian. The idea, the person who gives the impression that they know everything. And when I was younger, I was a real bullshitter. Like, I loved making shit up. I really loved, when I was in school, I loved making up bullshit and convincing people that bullshit was true. Like, I can understand why they're dangerous, but I think conspiracy theories are hilarious as well, though. Like, I think now I understand that the sinister side of it, that hostile regimes make them up.
Yeah.
But to be a romantic part of me that thinks working for like a secret service and making shit up is just fucking magical.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Trying to convince people of nonsense to gain a strategic advantage in a war. I just think that kind of stuff's hilarious. And and I was always at that when I was younger. Like, I was always making up. Like, people used to say to me, "Was that a fact, or was it one of my facts?" Do you know what I mean? Like, that was the thing people used to say to me, like, because I was always trying to convince. I thought it was very funny if you could make something completely ludicrous up and convince someone it was true. I thought that was a lot of fun when I was younger. So and I do, I like that type of comedy. I like type of comedy where someone says something completely ridiculous, but then almost convinces you of it.
Yeah.
Then backs it up with rationality.
Do you watch other comedians, and do you watch them as a comedian, or are you taking those extra lessons all the time?
It depends. Like, I think, so I watched loads of comedy as a teenager. Loads. I watched, like, I would have watched, as a teenager, I would have watched every sitcom on telly. Like, there was none I didn't watch. Do you know what I mean? And I would have watched every bit of stand-up. Any bit of stand-up that was on telly, I would have watched it. Like, and I only really watched comedy. I didn't really watch dramas, or I watched movies, but I didn't really watch, like, my go-to would have been sitcoms. Like, when I was younger, I bought in. I remember Seinfeld was on BBC Two at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. It was on a completely non-prime time, ridiculous slot and and we had a video recorder that you could set the timer on it to watch it.
Yeah.
And I used to set time, so I used to watch Seinfeld. And I remember I was the only one in my school watching Seinfeld because I had no one to talk to about it, because myself and my brother watched them. Because we were setting the time, and no one else thought it was worth watching. And it was on crazy when you think of it now, like the time slot it had. It was like a Tuesday, BBC Two, 10:30 or 11:30, or when I would have to have been in bed. So I watched, and then when I was about 18 or 19, my brother bought me the entire box set of Seinfeld, and I watched all that. But then, if I'm honest, then I went to university, and in university I didn't really watch anything. Like, just was drinking and studying, just went out all the time. And then when I qualified from university, then I was just working, and I got into, like, I ran marathons and did long distance cycling and got into stuff like that. So I wasn't really watching TV then. And then when I started comedy, I started watching comedy again. So I had never heard of, when I started comedy 6 years ago, I hadn't heard of James Jack Hester or Daniel Kitson. Someone brought me to see a show of the two of them.
Yeah. And
like, I thought they were unbelievable, but I had missed the whole there was a whole generation of comedians I had missed because I hadn't been watching.
Right.
But I do think I can definitely watch comedy and enjoy it. Like, I don't always watch it as feel like I'm learning from people. Like, there's some acts, I think if the act is a little bit like my act, I might watch it in a more learning way. But I have to be honest, I would much, like, I love doing a gig now in a big club, and what I like, there's headliners on the comedy circuit that I love watching, like club headliners.
Yeah.
And I find the specials hard to watch. Like, I get bored, if I'm honest. Even the big stars, the Americans. Like, if I go to them, I don't mind them so much if I go to them live. But to watch them on the laptop, I rarely get by the 15, 20-minute mark. Very rarely. I get a bit bored. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit older or something like that, but I think a lot of stand-up for the audience, I think a lot of it, I think sometimes stand-up maybe helps you get your worldview clear, or it helps you're not sure how you think about things. Because I remember when I was younger, in my early 20s, I was very unsure about what I believed, and, very confused by the world. You're very confused by the world. You're like very confused about who you are, what you believe, what you want, all of these kind of things. And I think stand-up helps people with those kind of questions.
Yeah.
But like, I'm a bit older now, and I've read a lot, and my approach to that was to read a lot. But I think a lot of people use stand-up for that. And so I think a lot of stand-up that people say is brilliant, I watch it, I find it a bit boring, because I'm not trying to answer those questions anymore.
Right.
So it doesn't really. But I love watching, like, club headliners. So, like, the type of people I'd get very excited. Like, I love watching Slim or Mick Ferry or someone who's been killing the clubs for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, I could watch those type of acts live all day, every day.
Yeah.
Like, just, Jeff Innes, just the way they command the room, boss the room. Like, I can watch those big acts all day.
Yeah.
And then I always love watching acts who move a lot on stage. So that would probably be the only thing I would be much more aware of now than before I started comedy is. Always very aware of whether the act moves or not. So an act that I love Susie Ruffle, because she moves a lot. She does a lot of play. She does a bit where she uses the stand of the microphone, and so I always, and Tommy Tiernan moves. So I always like acts that move a lot. During COVID, I don't know if you saw this. During COVID, the Comedy Store did a thing where every week, if you paid them a $5, you could watch 4 classic sets from the Comedy Store.
Right, yeah.
2 from London, 2 from Manchester. And I watched a whole lot of them. I watched all of them. And I was able to watch that. Like, 4 20-minute club sets from the Comedy Store that was easy to watch. But, like, get me a Netflix special that's an hour long.
Yeah.
I'd get bored. I get bored 15 minutes in. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It wouldn't. It doesn't do it for me. But I was able. But every weekend, every Friday I came home from work during COVID. There was a period every Friday I come home from work. I got a couple of. I wouldn't have been drinking during the week because I was working in a pharmacy. I got myself a pack of cans, put on the Comedy Store, and I watched it every Friday. That was my Friday. During COVID, I hadn't seen any of those acts.
Sure.
Those Comedy Store acts.
Yeah.
You know, I had done. Before COVID, I had done a 10-minute trial in the Comedy Store, so I hadn't been performing in big clubs.
Yeah.
So all these acts were new to me. Like,
yeah.
There's this. I heard this thing before that if you're too much of a fan of something, it's very hard to get very good at it, right? Because if you're a massive ballet fan, right, and you'll be watching the masters of ballet, and then if you start ballet, you're trying to do, you have in mind the mastery of it.
Yeah.
But you need to be learning the basics.
Yeah.
So I think maybe too, there's an element where I always like to watch people who are maybe a few levels above me rather than a lot of levels above me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So I suppose I'm still enthralled to how to smash a club rather than a theatre. You know, I haven't really performed much in theatre, so I'm not. And from the little I have done in theatres, it is different. I can tell it's different. The energy is different. The vibe is different. The rhythm is different. But I think I'm still enthralled to trying to get better and better in the club. So I'm more interested in watching someone who is killing the club because that's what I want to learn to do next. That's what I want to learn to do now.
Yeah. One of the things I've heard is that nothing inspires new comedians like bad comedians, because if you see someone who you can see someone who can go, well, they're doing it and I could be way better than that.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying about you're looking at people who are a couple of steps above you.
Good. Yeah.
Lift you up rather than push you up.
I'd be a bit different. Yeah. The bad ones, I'd be different. Like I see someone good and I'm like, oh, I want to be.
Yeah.
I love the way they did that. I want to do that.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky one too. Like, I think I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's hard to find any inspiration. Like, I think it's very easy to find inspiration. Like, I think, like, particularly if I go on holidays for a few weeks and I don't gig for a few weeks, like, I'd be absolutely itching to get back because I'll have seen something or I'll have thought of something and I just cannot wait to share it and say it and see if it works.
Yeah.
I think that's the big. I think that's still the most. I think I still think the most fun bit is having an idea, and then not knowing whether it'll work or not, and then if it does work, it then becomes very. And the new joke that works is always more fun than the old stuff.
Yeah,
and that excitement lasts for a while, and then once you get to a point where you're guaranteed it works, then it becomes less interesting. You know,
yeah.
That's it. I think it's always that, and I suppose that's a bit of a gambling thing. That's I think that's probably the same psychology as gamblers, because it's the not knowing.
Yeah,
it's the exciting. Will it go well? Will it go bad? Will it go well? Will it go bad? Do you know what I mean? It's like you're flicking the coin.
Yeah.
To see and you know, if it goes bad, you're going to feel bad. If it goes good, you're going to feel good. But you don't know. You know, and I think that's very. I find that part. I can't. That part never gets boring.
Yeah. Anticipation.
The anticipation, yeah. It's just the not knowing, the excitement. It's the gamble, and obviously humans definitely have something in our genetic makeup that makes us want to keep gambling, because all of human history is gambling. Yeah, and then gambling itself is so you know, well, I don't know, popular is the right word, but it's, you know, it's so insidious. Yeah. So it's comedy in many ways is, I suppose it's a safer form of gambling. Yeah. Because it's not life or death, and it's not, you're not risking money, but I think you are getting that same thrill. You're satisfying that need to take the risk. Yeah.
You're trying to win, but if you win all the time, there's no joy in it. Kind of.
There's no joy, yeah. And you're never going to win all the time. Yeah. And it might feel like life or death. It might feel like, you know, the excitement, the adrenaline, the fear, all of that might feel as if you are taking a risk that is life or death, but it's not. But it feels like it is. So it's
Yeah.
It's a satisfying thing.
What about when those risks have paid off or not paid off? So what have been your so far worst and best moments in comedy?
Worst and best moments in comedy. The best is probably very, very hard to sum up. I'm trying to think the best. You'd have a lot of best ones. Anytime you do a gig in a comedy store, it's great. Anytime you do a gig in a big club, it's a lot of fun. Then I'd have far too many good ones to mention. Even the other night, I had a very. Even the other night, I had this. Now this just shows you, like, I guess this is what makes it so much fun, because when people ask you your best, you're always going to kind of say the marquee stuff, like the big gigs and the whole lot. But sometimes a small gig can be just as fun or as satisfying. So I did a small gig in Hackney. I think there was 25 people there, and I'm doing new material, and the gig is going well and the whole lot. And then at the end of the gig, very end, I spoke to a guy in the front row and asked him his name. He told me his name. I asked him where he's from, and he told me he's from Hackney. And I asked him what he did, and he said he did astrology, right?
Yeah.
So I said, like, you write the column in the newspaper? And he said, no, but he said, not quite that. And then I said, so people give you money and you read their fortune through astrology? And he said, yeah, that's what he does, right? And at the end of my 10 minutes, and I could tell that the room was mainly young professionals, software developers, salespeople, the whole lot. They'd known I was a pharmacist. And I could tell that the whole room was waiting and expecting me to butcher this fella, right? I could sense it. That this is what they were expecting. This is what they were all gearing themselves for.
Yeah.
And then without thinking about it, like I came off this top of my head. I turned around to him and I said, well, you're probably the only man in Hackney earning an honest living. Right? and like, I walked off stage going, that's the funniest thing I've ever said. Like, it was the biggest laugh I got in the whole thing. But there was an alchemy to it. There was a real magic to it, because everybody was expecting me to say something else. And I didn't think that and then say it. I didn't decide to say that. I said, and that's where you kind of think that the whole, it's not really you, It's I got myself in a right, and that's what you do with friends. That's how you make friends laugh.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You just we had all gotten such the 10 minutes build up to that had allowed us all to get in a comfortable to get comfortably in sync with each other, that was then able to happen. That's magic. Like, that is magic. Like, I walked away, I left that gig over the moon. Like, and that's my, that. So Wednesday, I was at work all day. It's, it's a boring Monday and Wednesday, but that was a little bit of magic,
Yeah.
So, those things will always keep you going, and they can happen at any gig. Then the worst gigs are never that bad either. Like, gigs are never bad. They can be very embarrassing.
Sure.
Like, when it goes badly, it can be embarrassing, but but it also it can be funny. Like, as how it can be funny at how ridiculous it all is. Like, I had a really bad show in Edinburgh, solo show. You came to see one of my solo shows, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
In this Edinburgh, yeah. But I had one that was really bad. Like, I had one where I had a couple of days where it was very busy, and then I had a couple of days where nobody showed up, and I didn't do a show. And then I had a day where I think 7 people came, and I was going to cancel it, right? I wasn't going to do it. But then there was one guy who was like, he goes, I came to see you the other night when you were emceeing, and I've got a story that I need to tell you. So we started off, and he told us this story, and he told us this story, and it was an amazing story. He told us this story for 15 minutes. So then there was 7 people there. So then other people started telling stories. Then I told a couple of stories, and basically for an hour, like, I probably spoke for half the time. Not even, they told stories, I told stories, and we had a great hour. And at the end of it, I said, listen, I'm not going to do a bucket because I didn't do the show. I didn't tell you any jokes. I didn't do anything show. And the guy who told the great story that started it all off said, "Don't be stupid," he says. We've all had a great time. We're going to give you some money. And they all gave me, like, I think a minimum of 10. Like, they all gave me quite good money. And then the next day I show up and there's 9 people there, right? Yeah. So I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to, and this is the biggest mistake comedians always make, is when you try to recreate something that happened in the past.
Yes.
So I thought, I'll do the same thing again. I'm not going to do my show. I'm just going to try to get them to tell me stories and I'll tell stories and all that. But it was a completely different 9 people and it really went nowhere. And I went 20 minutes in, I wanted to leave, they wanted to leave. It wasn't going anywhere. So then I tried then to start doing jokes and stand up. But the goodwill was destroyed. So it really didn't work. But I just plodded along and I think I got to 45 minutes and I was like, okay, then I'll stop. And I said the same thing again. I said about, I'm not going to do a bucket because I didn't really do shit. And no one objected. Everyone was and it gets even worse. No one objected. And then there was a guy, a guy who was in the British Army, retired. I think he was in the Paras or something. I think he'd fought in Korea. I don't know, maybe Korea. I don't know where he'd fought. He had probably been in the army, had fought in a lot of different places. He actually walked up on stage and in front of the other people, gave me a big hug. And that was how. Now, I didn't feel that bad, but I think to those 9 people, I looked like someone who was pursuing something that I had absolutely no aptitude for. Like, I think they thought I was a complete hopeless case. One of the women actually said to me, well, you have a good day job, don't you? Like, and it was so embarrassing, like, because there's a part of me that's like, there's a part of your vanity and your ego that's like, I want these people to know that I can actually do it. I just made the wrong decisions today. Do you know what I mean? But you just have to let it go. You just have to kind of laugh that it's funny. Yeah. But like, there are 9 people who think that I am completely delusional doing comedy and that have no ability to tell a joke. Now, if they ever see me doing anything noteworthy, they'll be absolutely stunned. Like, they'll be like, Jesus, because what they saw was, I think to them, I would have looked like someone who was completely lost, who had taken on a venture that he was completely out of his depth doing, It was so bad. It was unbelievable how bad it was, like, But it happens,
And there's an old ex-army fella. We'll see you again one time and go, I gave him the hug that helped him carry on.
Yeah. And how, like, there was a real disconnect between how that looked and how that was, because I then left and went and did a gig in Dropkick Murphys to maybe 80 people that did well, and then went and MC'd the gig to 100 people. So, like, it wasn't a low point. It wasn't a bad point. But to them, it was, like, they really thought they saw someone on the verge of a mental breakdown or a complete collapse. But they didn't. But I couldn't explain to them that what they saw wasn't what they saw. Like, I had just made a big decision at the start of the gig that was terrible. If I had done the show, it might have been all right. But that's where it's very tricky. There's a kind of an ethos in Edinburgh that if you have too few, don't cancel, or
Yeah. But I've been to loads of shows where I was the only one in the audience. I've been outnumbered by the stage more than once.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
Sometimes they go, it's fine, we'll have a drink, we'll have a chat. It's your hour, do what you like.
Yeah, so that's weird. But if you get the right people and you just have a drink and a chat with them, it's good. But if you do get it, like what I got was, I just had 9 people who didn't want to have a chat.
Yeah.
So it just became really awkward very quickly, And the only guy who did want to talk to me, who I ended up talking to a lot, the conversation was just quite dull.
Right.
But he was the only one willing to talk. He was the only one who had any interest in talking. So I just kept talking to him.
We talk about you talked about doing the spots and doing your show and doing MCing.
Yeah.
What was that year like as a whole? And where were you happiest, do you think, MCing or doing spots, or where are you most comfortable?
So Edinburgh last year for me was very successful for a few reasons. So it was very successful in I had a few objectives and I achieved them all. So I lost money. I kind of broke even and lost money. So it's the money I spent to go to Edinburgh. So the money I paid to do a show, for my accommodation, the money I spent in food and drink, I got all that money back. So in one sense, I broke even.
Yeah.
But I had to take unpaid leave off work.
Right.
So I didn't make up the wage I lost.
Right.
But financially, I would say that for me was a success. The two main goals I had was, one, get as much stage time as possible. I did 100 gigs in 26 days or whatever, so I got plenty of stage time. The other thing I did was I emceed every night. MCing I find much harder than doing a spot. If I'm honest, the idea of MCing never appealed to me. It was never something I ever wanted to do, but I kept asking comedians for advice, more experienced comedians, and they all told me to MC. They said it just makes you better. And I think the fact that I find that I have to really I have to really concentrate when I MC. So like one of the things that's interesting about me MCing is if I do a normal gig on a Friday, Saturday night, I think nothing of having a drink or two. But if I'm MCing, I don't drink, right? Because I feel like I have to be, I have to be fully alert, like. Right. And I think the thing with MCing is you've less control. MCing, you've a lot less control. So I feel like I need to be a lot more focused. But I MC'd every night in Edinburgh, and so that was a huge help to me. And on the back of it, I've got MCing gigs from it. So I got MCing from it, and then I got the little bit of luck that can only kind of happen in Edinburgh. Like I got to MC a comedy tent at Connect Music Festival for Live Nation because they had booked a comedian and he couldn't do it. Then they booked another comedian, he couldn't do it. And then I got doing it like last minute and it went well. And that promoter has booked me for quite a few gigs since. And I think part of the reason is because of that. I think they put me in last minute for a gig that was pretty big and I did well. And it's sort of like, okay, there's a reliability there, and I think when you're booking gigs or anything else in life, you're always, you're going to do what's easiest for you. And I think once you build a partnership with someone and they're kind of reliable and they're competent, you'll just keep going back to them. And that started there. So if I hadn't been to Edinburgh, that wouldn't happen. So it's very successful. I had the objectives. This year I'm not going. My thing with Edinburgh now is I would only go if I had a good deal. So last year I got MCing for AAA. I have a bit of an idea now of which rooms and which times do well and which don't.
Right.
And I would only take on a room and a time that I thought would do well. But I also think that the level I'm at and the position I'm in, I'm unlikely to be offered those rooms now. So I might come back to it in years' time, but I wouldn't take on a room where I thought you're going to have to really work hard to get people into this room. I'm not interested in doing that. I think you've got a limited amount of energy, and I don't want to waste my energy flying. It's not a skill set I'm looking to develop, and I'm getting enough proper gigs now, club gigs, that I feel like I don't need it. Like I'm progressing. There's no hindrance to me progressing. I'll go back to Edinburgh in the future if I build a bit more status and a bit more profile, and that affords me a better room and a better slot that I think I can make work without having to, really fight to get the audience in. I'll go back. But at the minute, I wouldn't have got a room like that. I would have got a room in a time that was a bit of a hopeless case, and I'm not interested in doing that.
How can we find out about you and where we can come and see you?
So the main way you can find out about me is probably Instagram. Instagram's kind of the thing I use the most. I have a website, but I'm terrible at updating it. But yeah, the main way you can find out what I'm doing is through Instagram. And then what am I doing? So I'm doing the Hastings Fringe. I'm doing a solo show there, and I'm doing the Brighton Fringe. I'm doing a one-off solo show there. The show's called I Am Napoleon, which I explain why I called it that in the show. It's that's probably the best bit about the show, understanding why I call it that. And then most weeks I'm in clubs. I gig a lot in Dublin, and I gig a lot in London. So London and Dublin are kind of the two main places. I'm doing a gig in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but my girlfriend's Mexican and she has printed the jokes for me in Spanish. So I'm going to read them off. Yeah, and that's it. Instagram, yeah, comedian Jack Hester. That'd be the best. If you want to follow me, that's the best way to do it.
So my last question is always the same. How would you summarize comedy in a nutshell?
How would you summarize comedy in a nutshell? This is an interesting question. Comedy is making people laugh. That's all it is. I think at its base level, comedy is making people laugh. Now, one of the things I find interesting about comedy is I don't believe that all comedy is good. So, I hear people say that comedy is making people laugh and laughter is inherently good. I don't believe that. So comedy is making people laugh, and when people laugh together, they bond. It brings people together, right? And you can say that's all good. But I read a book before I did comedy called Humanity, which is about genocides. And there was a whole chapter in it about humor and about how regimes that have carried out genocides in the past, how important humor is in the dehumanization process that allows them to kill people. That without that, like you can't exterminate people until you've dehumanized them. And humor has always played a massive role in the dehumanizing of people that makes it palpable then to kill them. So I don't think comedy is always good. I do think comedy is making people laugh. I do think making people laugh brings people together, but it can be used for good or for ill. I think you can make people laugh and bring them together for a bad purpose. So the purpose of your comedy is important. Now, I don't think anyone on the circuit is, dehumanizing people because they've got the objective of genocide. But that is something that has been, it is a tool. But comedy I think it's just making people laugh. My goal is just to make people laugh. When I started, my goal is make people laugh. And my family had a pub. My dad was a politician, and I work in a pharmacy. So I feel all my life I've been very exposed to the public, and I know that I'd be very aware that life is very hard for a lot of people. And I think, so my kind of favorite comedians, and I think the type of comedy I was always trying to do is not challenging comedy. I'm not trying to change people's views or minds. I'm not. Now, people who are trying to do that are probably my favorite comedians to watch, but that's not what I'm trying to do. For me, comedy, what I'm trying to do is just be a bit of a morale boost. I just want to make people feel a little bit better about their shitty lives. So I would be, honestly, I would like your Mickey Flanagan's, your Peter Kay's, your Mike, they're the kind of acts that I would most be trying to be like, because I think what they're doing is more valuable than anyone else, because they're just giving people a little perk, but they wouldn't be my favorite comedians to watch. Now, they would have been when I was younger, I think, but I think when I was a teenager, I would have loved those kind of comedians. But then I think, looking back when I was a teenager, I was probably a little bit depressed, and that's probably why I like those ones. Now I would prefer the ones that are a bit more challenging, but I think people need the little pep up more than they need the challenge. Do you know what I mean? I think the challenge is a luxury. Do you know?
Yeah.
But most people just need a little boost to get through the day. I think challenging people and changing the way people think is kind of more a luxury.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
For sure. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
No worries at all, Mark. And best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you so much and see you soon.
Take it easy, Mark.